The PS3 was one hell of a console generation. Sure, the thing was notoriously hard to develop for, but the exclusives that came out on that console were some of the best in gaming. Now, there is one teeny tiny problem, however. There's still many classics still trapped on the system. Now, while the Xbox One was pretty much a failure as a generation, the biggest prop I can give to Microsoft is their backwards compatibility program. It's unbelievable how well and easy it works. So if you're asking yourselves, why hasn't Sony done the same thing for its PS3 games? Well, there is a rumor going around on Sony possibly bringing select PS3 games over to PS5 with backwards compatibility, but as of now, that rumor is just dust in the wind. So what's the real reason Sony has had trouble implementing backwards compatibility, especially for PS3 games? Well, blame the unique CELL processor Sony used for the console. The CELL CPU didn't follow the normal rules of cores and threads. It had a very ahead of its time way of processing that was difficult to take advantage of. Many have compared the power of the CELL broadband engine to modern CPUs, but no one was ever able to use anywhere near its full power because it was difficult to code for. Only first-party games like The Last of Us were designed around the CELL, and it shows in their performance. Sony went back to normal CPUs with the PS4, making developers much happier. The CELL broadband engine was a little too ahead of its time, unfortunately. So if backwards compatibility or emulation is out of the question, then why are some of these gems still not remastered for the PS4 or 5 at this point? I know PS Now exists, but I hate the input lag that comes with streaming these games on newer consoles. There's so many gems Sony is just sitting on at this point. The closest game that is more than likely coming out very soon for the PS4 and 5 would be Metal Gear Solid 4, which is rumored to be one of the games on the Metal Gear Solid Master Collection Volume 2. But that is just one of the amazing games still trapped on the console. Do you guys remember the Killzone franchise? One of the top 2 PlayStation shooters exclusive to the PS3? And no, I'm not talking about Haze. Granted, say what you want about Haze, I still kind of liked it, oddly enough. I'm talking about, obviously, Killzone. This was essentially PlayStation's Halo back in the day. Killzone was synonymous with the PlayStation brand in the PS3 era, with Killzone 2's release in February of 2009 being something of a landmark for the console that seriously struggled with quality exclusives in its first couple of years of release. The Killzone series would become one of Sony's top franchises in the years that followed, with the PS3 sequel Killzone 3 launching in 2011, and one of the PS4's launch titles in 2013 being Killzone Shadowfall. But sadly, I don't see a resurgence for this franchise as its developers, Guerrilla Games, is now developing the Horizon titles. Very fun open world games, but it makes me miss the simple days of having a classic shooter. And who can forget the other go-to Sony first-person shooter franchise, Resistance. This is still one of my favorite shooter franchises to this day, and to me, criminally underrated. Its story was fascinating and unique, set in an alternate history where aliens called the Chimera invaded Earth in the 1950s, and because it was developed by Insomniac, creators of the Ratchet & Clank series, another damn franchise that needs to have most of its games put on newer consoles, the unique weapons with, alternating firing modes like shooting through walls or shooting a tracking dart into an enemy so all bullets target that specific point. It was creative and fun. A very good trilogy with a damn good PSP handheld game, with Retribution, and a very good PS Vita game with Burning Skies. Again, this is just another franchise that is probably never getting revived, as Insomniac is now working on the highly rated and extremely well-liked Marvel Spider-Man games. Now, while those are the shooter franchises still tucked to the system, there are still other games that still need to be unshackled from the confines of it. I'm going to spitball a quick few ones off the top of my head before I get to one of my favorite franchises that 100% needs to come back. And yes, some of these you can play on other consoles, I know, but they still need to be ported anyways. Considering Dead Space 2 and the 3 remake were sadly cancelled, at least that's the rumor, we need a way to play these games on, PlayStation consoles other than 3. Dead Space 2 being my personal favorite of the franchise, and again, another win for Xbox's backwards compatibility of being able to play these games on newer consoles. The Lords of the Shadow Castlevania games is one hell of a duology of Dracula's origin story that more players need to experience, and finally something different than the typical Metroidvania style we get ad nauseum all the time. Then we have the God of War series, with God of War 3 being the only game in the saga being remastered for PS4. The rest of the saga is still bound to the PS3, in a very good collection where you get 5 God of War games, 1 through 3, and the 2 underrated PSP title, Chains of Olympus and Ghost of Sparta. And who could forget the prequel of it all, God of War Ascension? With how popular the God of War, somewhat reboot sequel was in the last 2 games, many people probably have no idea how brutal Kratos was in his younger years. I think everyone should be able to experience the beginning of his journey, and having the whole saga on modern consoles seems like a no-brainer for Sony. There's also the Sly Cooper series, the Ratchet and Clank series, MotorStorm. The list goes on forever, but the 2 main games I would love to see brought to modern consoles has got to be Infamous 1 and 2. You see, before Sucker Punch went and made one of the best games of the previous generation with Ghost of Tsushima, they had a little franchise under their belt called Infamous. Hell, Infamous Second Son, while not being as good as the first 2 in my eyes, was the reason I originally bought a PS4. Infamous was the comic book superpower video game at the time. The comic panels in the first game told an incredible story, and running around or, gliding on rails through the city with Cole's newly acquired electric powers is timeless. The morality system wasn't very nuanced. It's essentially what Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic did. Do you want to help a kitten out of a tree or kick a puppy for no reason? There's no really good gray here. The game also looks a little rough nowadays and plays a bit janky, but the story and characters are amazing, and the twist ending is still one of the best in the medium. Infamous 2 one-upped everything the first did by upping the stakes. With more elemental powers depending on your choices in the story, the game is still great to play today. Honestly, I don't want these games just to be ported. I want full-blown remasters or remakes, but that'll probably never happen. Can you imagine a Blue Point, remake of the first 2 Infamous games? I would die a very happy man. There's definitely some more PS3 games I could be mentioning, but I'd be here forever. I just hope this rumor has some legs to it and turns out to be true. While I would prefer most of these games getting a remaster or remake in some way, having the ability to play them on newer hardware is nothing to sneeze at. Bring it on, Sony.